Hello, my name is Bill and this is SixRounds Studio. Today we're over at the retail shop and we're going to set up this brand new Ruger American bolt-action rifle for a client who wants to take it hunting. Now this gun is new in box and the customer hasn't shot it yet. And what he's asking us to do is get it prepped for deer season. So we're going to check out the gun as delivered new from the factory. Now we're setting this rifle up for deer season here in New Hampshire. Deer season in New Hampshire is November. November in New Hampshire is cold. You're going to want to make sure that the eye relief is correct. Now, knowing that the customer is going to be wearing a heavier jacket, I'm going to put my winter jacket on so that I get a little bit extra padding here so that that eye relief is going to be more representative of a hunter or a shooter wearing a jacket. So let's mount the gun and make sure that the eye relief is good. So what we're looking for when we mount the gun, we want instantly to see the full view of the lens. We don't want to see any dark spots around it. And we also don't want it so close to us that when we shoot the gun's going to come back and slam us in the eyes. So Ruger's setup for that is actually pretty good. Now, what I did notice is that the crosshairs are angled, and they're angled a good 8 to 10 degrees. So we can't leave it that way. We're going to have to fix that. We're going to have to level out those crosshairs, just because I'm particular that way. So we're going to mount this in a vise with a padded jaw, and we're going to clamp it in that jaw. So the reason that I'm doing this is to loosen up the screws in the scope rings so it frees the scope to rotate in the rings. Now these are star head screws, so you've got to have the right wrench for that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ruger supplies that with these setups. And we're going to just loosen these up. Not going to loosen them up a whole amount, but we want to loosen them up enough so that we can rotate that scope. There we go. If you can see, we can now move that scope. So I'm mounting up the gun, and I'm going to rotate that scope until I feel that the crosshairs are level or in the correct orientation. I'll tell you a cute story. When my dad was alive and when he was mounting scopes, he'd go through the same thing. He'd try to level out the scope rings, and he'd say, "Bill," he says, "take a look at this and tell me what you think." He says, "It looks like it's off just a little bit to the right to me." And I'd mount the scope, or I'd mount the rifle, and I'd look down the scope, and I'd go, "Well, Dad, it looks to me like it's off just a little bit to the left." My old man would look at me and say, "Bill, we're going to nail it right there." So the comedy is that unless you have some really precise way of doing it, and I'm sure there are some shops that do, getting these things level, it's sort of a feel thing, and I do the same thing. I've got a couple guys that work here part-time, and I'll ask them the same thing, and they'll tell me, it looks like it's off to the right a little bit, and I'll say, it looks like it's off to the left a little bit. We're going to nail it right there. Now once we have the crosshairs level, we're now going to need to retorque the screws for the scope ring. And one thing about torquing up these screws, and I don't know how much Ruger cares about this when they're putting these guns together, but we want to torque them up evenly. So sort of like torquing up lug nuts on your car, you don't want to take it all down on one side. Now you notice I'm using the small end of the wrench for my leverage, because what I don't want to do is torque one side too quickly and then have that actually twist the scope off. So I'm just bringing it up and doing little bits at a time. Once we've got that done, then we're going to pick the rifle up again. We're going to check check our level and make sure that we haven't lost it by torquing up the screws. Now before we take it out and shoot it, we're going to bore scope it because we want to make sure that the reticles are in alignment to some reference point before we go out and throw any rounds down range. Alright, so the windage is right on. So it's right over the crosshairs that are visible in the bore scope. So we now need to lower the center point of the crosshairs. Now at this stage, I'm not going to worry about counting my clicks. I just want to get the crosshairs down level with the crosshairs in the bore scope. So it looks like I can move it to the left a little bit, so we'll do that. Alright, so the crosshairs are now directly centered to the crosshairs that are in the bore scope. So I think we're ready to go. I do want to point out one thing that my old man taught me a long time ago. And of course we use these wooden handled gunsmithing screwdrivers. He used to teach me, he says, every time you're done with this, Bill, he says, just give the scope a light tap. We're not talking about, you know, huge energies here, just a light tap, just to make sure that that when it clicks over in those little gears, that it's centered in the little gears. That way when the gun goes off, it doesn't move a click or some amount. Now there is one more thing that I want to check before we take it out shooting. Remember, this is a factory gun. This is produced in a factory. You have employees that have production requirements, and they're putting these things out. And even though Ruger tries to build in the quality, there are days, there are things that can always happen. So you wanna check everything that you can. And one of the things I want to check is the actual tightness of the rings onto the scope base itself, and I can tell this one is already loose. I just grabbed it, and the back one is tight, so we're going to tighten that up a little bit. But here's a lesson learned. I should have done that before I did all of the rest of it, because there is a slight possibility that now everything that I've done can be off. So, lesson one, make sure all your screws are tight. And honestly, I'm surprised that Ruger let it out of the factory this way. Didn't move a thing. All right, with that done, we're going to take it out to the range, and we're going to send a couple downrange. So this shooting jacket has age. It has, over the last 50 years, been responsible for sighting in a lot of rifles. So this is a 3-9, and I've cranked it up to 9 to sight it in, and it's a 308. We're set up for 50 yards. 50 yards here in the brush around New Hampshire deer hunting is more than adequate. So let's take our first shot. Alright, so the point of impact was at the top of the paper, which surprises me a little bit. So we're about 6 inches tall, or 6 inches high. So we're going to crank her down. Man, does that Ruger have a lot of creep. Holy smokes. So the windage is still dead on. We managed to bring it down about 3 inches. So let's bring it down a little bit more. All right, I'm going to bring it up a little bit. All right, so let's take a look at this target and determine if this rifle is sighted in good enough for deer in the brush in New Hampshire. So we bore scoped this and we assumed it was going to hit a little bit high. I didn't expect it to hit this much high, but we're about 6 inches high of center, high of bull. So we adjusted it, we brought it down. Our second shot was here. Obviously we didn't move it enough, so we brought it down again, hit down here. So I adjusted the reticles or the crosshairs up, and my next round was right here. So at that point I was pretty happy with it, so I decided to send a 5th round downrange. That one hit right here. So we have about a 1/2 inch spread or a 1/2 inch group on this. Everything is about a 1/2 to a 3/4 of an inch to the left. I'm in the 10 ring. Here in New Hampshire, 50 yards in the brush, that's a dead deer. So this is something a little bit different for me, filming down here at the retail shop. If this is something that you liked, if you enjoyed this, please let me know in the comments and we can maybe do some more of this. Give it a thumbs up if you liked the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. All this helps the algorithms, convinces YouTube that this is a channel worth watching. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next video. Oh, by the way, that little Ruger with its hollow plastic stock, even in 308, when you touch that off, she does have some recoil. And yes, Ricky, I did that just for you. See you guys in the next video.